from the CyberHub bunker and studio. You're tuning in to the CyberHub podcast, Tech Corner. And now, join me in welcoming your host and CISO, James Azar.
Hello, veterans, audience, geeks, peeps, nerds, and cybersecurity enthusiasts of all walks of life, shapes, and forms. Welcome to the CyberHub podcast, Veteran November episodes. We've done so many of these already. We've spoken to people from all walks of life, from all creeds, and joining me today is just another one of the brave men and women that represent our armed services, Mark Lynd. He's the head of digital business. What's happening, Mark?
You know what? Just enjoying myself and, just kind of working our way through, keeping up. It's been a tough time this 2020, but things are looking up and a lot of good things are going on. And yeah,
it's a little over a month left in this year, and I can't wait for it to be over with. Folks, before we get going on today's podcast, if you have not subscribed to our podcast, yes, please make sure to do so right now. If you're watching us on YouTube, subscribe, hit the bell button. If you're listening on your favorite podcast listening platform, subscribe, give us a review and comments. Those always help. We love to hear from you. You can find all of our awesome, amazing, groundbreaking content at cyberhubpodcast.com. So go there for that. Mark, I'm done with my pitch, right? I mean, it's it's so funny. I have to create a checklist of things I need to say, because if I don't tell people to, if it's not written, I'd forget to tell people to subscribe to the show.
Hey, you got to get it in there. You got a lot of good content out there, especially with all these vets.
Right. So 26 episodes for the month of November, Veteran November, giving people one library to get all the advice from all the people of all kinds of backgrounds, man, from combat to signal to intel to Air Force, Navy, Army, Marine Corps. I've had someone from England actually on the show. So, kind of reached out to the other side of the pond in an extension of veterans, because most of us who've been in battle have always been with our British counterparts.
Yeah, there's a lot of us. There's a lot of veterans. Right? I mean, they come in every form. It's pretty amazing. A lot of our stuff that we did in the Rangers and 82nd Airborne, we did a lot with the British military, the German. Just go down the list, Panamanian. We did a lot of different things, and all really good people.
Yeah, indeed. So, Mark, tell us a little bit about your military background. What branch of the military did you serve in, and what'd you do, more or less, with what you can share?
Sure. No, I proudly served in the U.S. Army. I was really happy. My dad was a Marine. My brother was in the Navy. And my uncle was in the Army and captured in the Battle of the Bulge, and was a command sergeant major. He was a senior guy in the camp. And so they all made a huge impact on me. So I played football in college, and I decided, after I'd messed up my knee, I was going to, rehabilitate it and go in the military. And I had I wanted to go. I was super excited about going. I wanted to continue the legacy my family has with the military. And I ended up spending just a little under 5 years. I was in the 3rd Ranger Battalion, 2nd 325 at the 82nd Airborne, and was attached with the 2nd 187th down in Panama. And I loved every single minute of it. I would do it again gladly.
That is a common theme among veterans, right? I think every single one of us has his uniform hanging somewhere in the closet.
I do.
Right? With your shined boots, with the right socks, underwear, and undershirt, because you can't go in anything but issue, right? And you always constantly look at your phone and, is it U.S. government? Is it U.S. government? Is it U.S. government? Right? Because you're waiting for the caller ID. Is that a 202 number? Is that a 202? That's the Pentagon, isn't it? That's the Pentagon. And it's some Indian telemarketer trying to tell you that the IRS and the police are outside your door. Mr. Mark, we have all of your information. The police is right outside your door. You owe IRS very much money.
I know, it's unbelievable. It's gotten those robocalls have gotten out of hand, and we talked about it. I have a bunch of my buddies that are I'm still very close to in Phoenix and Boston, etc., and that served with me. And I got to tell you, it's a real community. I mean, it's a global community because they live all over. I mean, we have so many expats in Costa Rica, for example, and it's pretty amazing, the diversity and the excitement when everybody gets together. And when you run into them, I run into them all the time. In fact, I know Patrick Benoit here in Dallas as well, where I'm at.
Right.
It's just a very common thing, and it's really great to see the other vets and hear their stories and see how they kind of got into cybersecurity.
Yeah, Pat's an old friend. I love Pat. Funny story is right before COVID broke out, first week of February, I was in Dallas. We did a CISA roundtable. We did a live podcast, and we did a live podcast over with our friends at Armor, and then we did a CISA roundtable and a tour of the new data bank data center with Mark over there and Pat. And it was a blast, man. It was like right before COVID. It was a few weeks before RSA. It was great. I was like, this year I had it all planned out, right? It was going to be Dallas. It was going to be San Francisco, right? Then we were going to head to Boston. Like, I was on the road this year. I had it all planned out, right? I had Israel on my calendar twice to go do this stuff over there. And then, COVID, right? And this isn't a podcast about COVID, but our resiliency in the military. I know a lot of people that have broken down with COVID. I think it made us resilient as veterans. Like, our resiliency just kicked in, like our training kicked in, like, okay, we got this invisible enemy. Well, is it really invisible? What's strategically the right things to do? Like, I know many veterans that were like, yeah, I'm not listening to the CDC. I'm doing my own research. I've spoken to this guy over here and this guy over there and so forth. There's an aspect to that. So how did you get into InfoSec? So you were kind of a combat guy.
I was. Yeah.
So I love the story of combat guys, because when I enlisted, I was 13 Bravo in the Army, and then they switched me to 35 Lima when I did the ASVATs. They were like, no, you go there. You go there. I was like, but that's the only reason I enlisted. I wanted to blow shit up. They're like, you'll blow shit up later. Right now, you're going to go do this. And so tell me, how'd you end up in InfoSec?
Well, I did want to blow shit up. That's a lock.
That's why you go into the Army. You want to play with multi-million-dollar toys that blow shit up.
That's it. And I was fascinated with the idea of airborne. I was fascinated with Rogers Rangers in World War II. I was fascinated with the history, and because my family has a lot of military history, for me it really struck a chord. So when I went into the recruiter and was talking to him, he goes, "Well, there's a $5,000 bonus to go into the Rangers, and you were already going to do airborne. You might as well do that." And I was like, "Sign me up." And I go, "When would I leave?" And he goes, "Today." And I was, "Today?" And I was like, "Okay, great." So my family didn't even know where I was for 4 days. I got down to Fort Benning, Georgia, and ended up calling them when I finally got some time. And they're like, "Where are you?" And I was like, I'm in Fort Benning. See you in 4 years. And everybody kind of got a kick out of it, but I wanted to jump out of planes. I was thrilled with it. And the CyberSec thing was a really interesting experience. It kind of shows you how fragile and interesting life can be. I got hurt on a jump, and I tore up my knee again, in my other knee. And but it was a pretty easy recovery, about a 2-month recovery. So during that time, they came out with these grid boxes that were for fire control, right? And for mortars. I ended up being in the mortars. And so once I started doing that, and you put in, all the information from the 13 Foxtrot, the Forward Observer, and you put in, what you're trying to do. There's a couple of barometric pressure, some other wind speed, things like that. It calls out deflection elevation for you in the charge, right? Which was very plot board driven, slow, could be very tragic in mistakes. And the minute I did that, I really was lucky. I was very blessed. I knew right then that I was getting out, and I was going back to the University of Tulsa, where I'd gone before, and I was going to get my degree in MIS, or computer science, which I did. And I was just intensely focused. But by the same token, I was like, I'm going to do the very best job I can. I even extended to go to the Sinai Desert for 6 months and do the multinational force observers. So I was driven, but during that time, I was messing with Macs. I was messing with all kinds of computers. I was educating myself the best I could, and I came out, got my degree, worked in operations for Armada Hess at night on mainframes. And there were some security guys in there, and he goes, I don't know what you're going to end up doing when you get done with this. He goes, but security's pretty awesome. This is the early days of security. And I go, okay, no. And I started getting interested in it. And then, all the movies and kind of some of the celeb stuff came out about it. And I was already into it. And something about the structure that we have in the military, something about, doing a good job and doing it right, and doing it with a whole lot of pride, really comes out great in cybersecurity. It puts you in a really good place in the cybersecurity field.
Yeah, there's it's interesting to see the path of combat people into InfoSec, right? A lot of times it's you see the traditional, and I mean traditional, I don't know if I'd say stereotype, but let's say the traditional path, right? You go into the military, you're in cryptography, you build your career in cryptography, you may go work for a 3-letter agency, you then kind of transition out, maybe after 10 years, you go to the defense industrial complex, you work for one of those guys for about another 10, 15, 20 years, and then you go into the private sector, right? And that's kind of the path, and you're always kind of in that military bubble. Was that the case for you, or did you essentially 5 years computer science and then you went into private? You became a citizen.
I went to private, and after I graduated from the University of Tulsa and doing that operations gig with Armada Hess, I got out and I immediately started working in technology and IT. But on the not on the vendor side by any stretch. I was totally on the other side and worked my way up to CIO, and then CSO, because they didn't call them CISOs back then, right? They were CSOs, and then ended up being the CEO of a company for a while, and then in the next one I ended up being the CIO and CISO. I'm in CTO for a large financial services, a global financial services company, and then did a CISO, another CISO gig after that before I came over here and went to the dark side, vendor side, right?
I don't know. I disagree with the dark side, vendor side approach. There's a lot of great vendors out there, right? Right. And so they're not all dark side. I think what's the dark side is when they don't invest in training their people. And so then they end up getting a bad rep because, they're trying to get bodies out there talking, but they're not really teaching those bodies how to talk.
Well, yeah, and they're always pitching. And I think that's the one thing you have to get used to when you go to that side. And there's a lot of brilliant people in technology now, especially on the cybersecurity side, that are making huge impacts that people never see, never recognize, and never know. Right. Being the vendor, and I go out and spend all this time with the CISOs and CIOs, we get recognized. But all those people, like a lot of the business CISOs at Bank of America, Wells Fargo, who are facing a tremendous amount of effort because there's a lot of attacks, a lot of drama, a lot of threat vectors, a huge attack surface. I mean, it's crazy. They're doing amazing work, and they get little to no recognition except internally because they don't even want them talking about it outside of work, because of security risk.
Yeah, it's I'll tell you, when for my CISO Talk podcast, it's always challenging to get some of the big Fortune CISOs on the show. We have to jump through loopholes. It takes months to get them on the show. Months, let me tell you. I think the longest I've ever had to get a CISO on the show was 5 months.
Oh boy.
Like we started talking, I think it was June, and it wasn't we didn't get approval until October, and then we're recorded in November.
Yeah, that sounds about right. It's funny, there's an amazing CISO veteran. I won't say what city, but it's one of the top 15 cities in the United States. Brilliant CISO. And he told me a story. He's like, Mark, because we're fellow veterans, so we kind of laugh and joke. He says, look, I went to a conference, and I just felt like I had things to say, and people were asking me questions, and I told them a little bit about this and that. And he goes, the next day, the number of attacks went up 71%, and it lasted for 3 days. And people were doing some of the things he said in there was a little bit too much information. And so they were trying to use those as additional attack vectors and intel to, break into their environment and then try to move east and west. And luckily, he kind of thought about it before it came out, before all that stuff, and he took a lot of actions, positive actions. But it's that kind of thing, right? And here's a former Navy intel guy. This is a sharp cat. This is somebody who really knows his stuff, and so it's a good lesson for all of us, and I think especially for veterans that are used to having some kind of secrecy involved in what their job is, what they do, what their movements are, if they're in CONUS, out of CONUS, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The idea of secrecy. One thing I will tell you in conferences is be careful what you talk. Even on my podcast, we never talk about, on my Sister Talk podcast, we never talk about security posture. What are you doing? What vendors you're using? What's your attack surface? I try to stay out of those. And kind of, because I realize, and I know for a fact that my content is viewed by friendlies as much as it's viewed, if not more, by our adversaries, by people who want to harm our organizations, by people who are trying to gain an upper hand, a little piece of insight, anything like that. And so it's you've got to be, I'm always mindful of that as I host a podcast. Let's talk a little bit about your transition, though. One of the most difficult parts for any service member is that moment you drive off. You sign off and you drive off, and all of a sudden you're no longer, rank, last name, or just last name. It just depends on on who you were, right? You could be Sergeant Lynd or you can be Lynd. It just that's just that's completely up to you. But to talk a little bit about that transition and what were some of the things that you did well and you planned for, and what were some of the things that you didn't plan for that you'd be like, hey guys, watch out for this, because this is the one thing, if you don't have drive, if you don't have motivation, if it can really set you back.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I speak at veteran events, and I do it for some of the manufacturers as well, because they all have veteran programs. And when they find out I'm a vet, they often ask me, especially with cybersecurity. It's become, as you pointed out, veterans in cybersecurity is pretty much like peas and carrots, to quote a famous movie. And I think one of the interesting things when I got out, like I said, I really knew what I wanted to do. I was very focused. But during the transition, I noticed that people in the civilian world don't have the same level of structure. So some of the structure, maybe some of the pride, some of that, and when working as a team wasn't there. And some of that, and that's a comfort, right? For after spending almost 5 years, I had a level of comfort with that. And so going out there and all of a sudden going from, a very structured environment where you kind of know where you stood on a daily basis, what you were supposed to be accomplishing, what effort it was going to take, taking a lot of pride in that effort, to going out and then all of a sudden dealing with all the politics of, a corporate event, corporate job, blah, blah, blah. It was a big difference. But I think where I kind of saw the transition that I found important was going into cybersecurity, going into technology was a good transition for me. I was thinking about some of the other choices if I'd gone into marketing or gone into maybe something that's maybe not so structured as you were, and it made a big impact. And even going from IT to cybersecurity, that was a big difference. There's definitely more structure. There's definitely more. You have to be there's greater attention to detail, which we know in the military. If you don't have attention to detail, you won't be a sergeant or an officer, right? You won't. You'll find yourself in a bad place. And I think that being able to take what I learned during that 5 years, take the structure, take the pride, the camaraderie that I had with working with a team, really facilitated my ability to rise quickly in the civilian world, but specifically in technology and cybersecurity, for sure.
Yeah, there's a piece to that I feel people who come from special forces are very structured as individuals, right? The military trains you to think a specific way. And so you left, you were very determined, you knew what you wanted to do. You had started it, and then you went to the military because you couldn't, you played football and you couldn't continue. And that, you've overcome a lot of different challenges in your life. So when you look at this, you've overcome two different injuries. One of the things I see with a lot of veterans that I speak with is the people who are on medical discharge, who are beat up, right? Because they didn't get a chance to fulfill their military potential, their service potential, right? They feel like they were cut short for whatever reason. And a lot of times, the injury to them isn't a big deal, but for the military, it's a standard, right? The military is a complex. It's got policies. It's got procedures. It's not willing to take a risk of putting someone who could not even be 100% out on the battlefield, in the event that's needed. And I'm grateful that over the last 4 years, we haven't needed to send our brothers and sisters over to fight another war.
So true.
That is something that I've been, in the month of November, as you and I are speaking, it's the month of thankfulness beyond Veterans Day, right? Thanksgiving. It's the best part. It's, there's two American holidays, right? Two holidays that define America: 4th of July and Thanksgiving.
Yes.
Period.
Yes, and I find it interesting, regardless of all the political drama that goes on our planet. It's every country. It's not just here. I've traveled a lot, and I still travel a lot, and you see it. But I think what's interesting is veterans as a whole are seen in kind of a special light in many cases, except for those, to your point, that have had medical issues or had a tough time with the transition. The way they're treated, and them sleeping on the street or not being able to get medical attention or these things, it's truly tragic. It's one of the most disturbing things that people have to deal with that've been in the military, is the idea of here are my brothers and sisters that I worked hard with and did all this, and they're sleeping on the street, or they can't feed their kids, or they're struggling, and yet they served this country and did it proudly, and they deserve a lot better. And I'm a firm believer in that. And a lot of the events that I speak at or go to, there's a lot of military veterans in those, and I always pay extra attention because a lot of them are struggling. I think in some cast of light, people think that veterans don't struggle as a whole. I don't believe that at all. I think 20-30% of all veterans struggle. It could be PTSD. It could be medical issues they had. It could be, they just came out and weren't prepared for the transition. I'm glad you brought that up in this call. It's in this podcast. It's an important thing, and we need to spend more time and I don't want to preach or evangelize, but I firmly believe we got to do more for our veterans. They are many of the people that many of the things that people worry about, people being poor, not being able to do anything, not be able to get medical attention. Hey, just take a look at the veterans, because 20-30% of them, that is what happens.
Yeah.
And that's not maybe, that's for sure.
I have a very, I have a perspective about why we see so many of our brothers predominantly on the streets. And it has nothing to do with drug and alcohol abuse. It has everything to do with the transition. Something always goes wrong in the transition. You come back from war, you're not the same person you go into. And I think all of us, everyone I've spoken with has been deployed at one point or another in their career, because for the last 70 years, we've been in perpetual conflicts where we fly over to different countries to eliminate threats to the homeland and eliminate threats to our way of life. And understandable. Again, we're not going to get into the politics of war. That's not the point of this, right? Here's where our veterans come back. They're different with their family. And sometimes their families move on. Something, we don't always talk about, but a wife or girlfriend that's with someone else because you were gone for too long, or family's different.
The divorce rate is huge. The divorce rate, especially when they return. If they were outside of CONUS and they come back to CONUS and then they're discharged, regardless of how they were discharged, to your point, it's just a horrifying transition for many people. It's almost more than they can handle, and in many cases, it is more than they can handle.
The military gives you one thing: it gives you a sense of pride and purpose. It gives you structure, and when you discharge, when you're out, you lose that.
Yes.
And so what happens is things start to slowly step away from structure. So you come home and you're discharged, and now you're excited to start your civilian life with your family, with your wife, and with your kids. And then, as you've indicated, divorce rate. Now, all of a sudden, that structure, that security blanket strips. Now you're at a dead-end job, right? You're working in some factory, or you're doing some sort of, dead-end job that has no purpose, no end in sight. It's wake up, wash, rinse, repeat all over again every single day. Take a day off, deal with bullshit. People complaining about the dumbest stuff when, you were shot at or attacked, or you've seen, your brothers and sisters die in battle, and so forth. And InfoSec, and I think this is one thing why I wanted to do this Veteran November, and why I wanted to do these episodes, and why I wanted to bring people like you on, Mark. InfoSec gives you purpose.
It does.
InfoSec gives you structure. Cyber gives you a sense of pride. It returns that self-worth, that ability to be part of a brotherhood and a team. If you're a SOC analyst and you're working with 20 other people in that SOC, that is your unit, that is your platoon. Those are the men and women that you serve with to protect the organization or the clients of your organization who are entrusting you to ensure that their perimeter security is set, that nothing gets through the door, right? That sense of purpose in InfoSec, I think, doesn't exist in any other industry.
I agree. And what's interesting is a lot of that has to do with tempo too. You think about when you're in the military, there's a tempo. You get up in the morning, you go have your meal, you're out in the field, boom, 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 boom. But there's constant tempo. And the tempo is so upbeat. I spent my entire almost 5 years in SOC, Special Operations Command, and the tempo is ridiculous. It's ridiculous if you're not prepared for it. It's ridiculous if you don't have the structure and the ability to do that. It's really ridiculous if you don't want to be there. And I think that's one of the things. You don't have a choice. Once you're out of the military, there's no, I don't want to be here anymore. There's no out. The tempo that you now see is going to be a reduced tempo in almost every case, in most cases. And when that tempo is not there and that structure is not there, people languish. They're not self-motivated. They don't have the tools and the support system that the military gives you to be successful. And I think some people can flourish in that environment and adapt. Some people cannot, and it's nothing against those that cannot. It's just the nature of the beast. Right.
I think that the fact that InfoSec though has a different tempo and it's got a different experience, and I think one thing I always tell veterans when I speak at events is, listen, in InfoSec we don't just need guys who know how to code, right? We don't need a Mr. Robot from everyone, right? We need people who know how to build relationships. We need people who understand strategy. We need people who can market. We need people who can talk. We need people who can think. We need thinkers. We need people who can solve problems by, I have a saying for combat guys. I go, if you look at a map, can you recognize weak points? They go, yeah. And I did this experiment at an event. I printed out huge posters, and we're almost out of time, folks, so bear with us here. I printed out this huge posters, right? And it was maps. And one of them was an IT map. Another one was like a ground map. But we made them look very, very similar. And I said, find all the weak points. And so, groups are working on them. And one of the groups was combat guys that are about to get out of the service, right? They had about 3-4 months in. And this was a workshop I was doing on base. And guys get up, they all look at the maps and they go, now you want to know what you guys solved? And they go, yeah. And I was like, those were IT maps. And guess what? You guys nailed them each.
That's fantastic.
Right. And then they went,
that's a great exercise. Yeah.
And they went, huh? And I was like, yeah. You guys are now IT experts. You guys can look at an IT network and recognize anywhere it is vulnerable to an attack and put together a strategy of how to defend it. What would you do? You'd build a wall. Okay, what does a wall translate to? Would you dig a ditch? What's a ditch mean? How does ditch translate in IT? Right? Would you put extra guards, extra sensors, cameras? Would you put on ground sensors? What would you do? All those things. And what are those? Now, how does that translate to IT? And they all left and they went, huh. So all we need to do is just translate this stuff into IT terms, right? So what's a motion sensor in IT? Right? Like a detection tool. All right. Brilliant. Right? Like but that's the thing is I feel like a lot of times when we're talking in our language, we're forgetting to speak in their language and give them the confidence that they can do it. Right? Just building that confidence that, you know what, it doesn't matter if you're, the best warrior on the field. We still need you in cyber because we need warriors in cyber. We need people who are going to look at a problem and find an out-of-the-box way to do it. Because with all due respect to a lot of our engineers and architects and coders, right, they are trained to think in a box. One of the things I always talk about with certs is I go, you need certs to survive, but don't let the cert add to your knowledge. Don't let it be the definition of your knowledge. Don't go into that square box of a cert. Let the cert build it, but think beyond the cert. If that makes sense.
Yeah, you absolutely do. Like you, I have a bunch of certs. I have even given up some because I just couldn't do all the continuing education. There's just too much drama. So to your point, I learned shortly thereafter, or even during that process, that it's not about certs. So you have to have one or two to justify and validate your experience so they can hire you. And plus, there's additional monies that come along with it, especially early in your career. But I think the interesting part of that is that over time, it really becomes about if you have pride in what you're doing, if this is truly what you want to do. I think, unfortunately, there are people that get into cyber, and I see this from time to time, and it's just not what they really wanted to do, but they were excited about the money and the fact there's a lot of demand and all that, and they got into it, and they weren't going to be successful, right? They weren't on a path to succeed, and I think that's one of those things. So if the cert it seems very distasteful for you and painful, if your first job you're not getting it, then you need to move east and west in your experience and find out, is there something in cybersecurity? Like you said, it's very broad. There's a lot of disciplines in cybersecurity. Find the one that sings to you. So the one that'll make you happy going into work each day. Because I don't know how you are, but I'm pretty sure I know, based on spending time with you, etc., and see what you do. I love what I do. I get up in the morning singing. I'm just happy as I can be. I love cybersecurity, and I love being a vet, and I like going out and making a positive impact on people in a crazy world.
I agree. We're almost out of time. We're actually overtime, not out of time. We're overtime. I've promised people 30 minutes, but then I get veterans like you who I want to talk to for 3 hours and do Joe Rogan style podcasts like I do on my CISO talk. But I can't promise people 30 minutes and I got to stay true to my word. And I don't want to edit any of this stuff out. So guys, I'm sorry. I'm going to ask Mark a last question and then we're going to sign off. And then Mark and I will think of a creative way to bring you more great content. So, Mark, what's one thing you loved about your military service?
One thing I love?
Yeah.
I absolutely love the camaraderie. I just, for me, it was second to none. I've never found it again. I have great friends. I have wonderful family. I have all that. But being in a stick on a plane at night when it's raining and the wind speed's higher, they're going 5 miles an hour, and really we all know it's 10 or 15, and you look at each other and you exit that aircraft and you land, and then you go find your brother and go to the panels. Hey, that's a special experience. There's something amazing about being in the 82nd and 700 people leaving the plane as you go over the top of a field and trying to find your way to the ground and find your way to your team and start to be positive and to take positive movement and do those things. It's that camaraderie. It's that teamwork. It is my hair standing up on my arm right now. It is the most exciting part. If I could ask for anything, if I could close my eyes and I'd ask for more camaraderie. I loved it. It was just intoxicating.
Folks, every single episode has ended with that comment. Every
Has it really?
single episode thus far has ended. The answer to this question should just be, so do you miss the camaraderie? And just let that be. Let's just, but I find it to be the best experiment for people to understand in today's era of social media, right? We see this with our kids, the need to belong, right? The pure ability of to belong to the brotherhood. And when you leave, it's never there. I guarantee you, if I was in Dallas tomorrow, folks, and I needed something and I called Mark or Pat or any other veteran I know, that stand up on their two back feet and be like, we're there for you, brother. In a minute.
Easy.
In a minute. We don't even need to know each other. What? I mean, we had something happen here in Georgia, folks, where we knew of a veteran World War II survivor who had perished and he had no family. And he was a Holocaust survivor as a kid. He left right when Germany invaded Poland, came to this country, and then 5 years later joined our armed services and went to fight to free the country that he came here from.
Amazing.
No family. He passed away here in Georgia, and he was a Jewish man, and I'm Jewish. I don't hide that. I say that to people all the time. I'm like, I'm not perfect. Neither are you. So,
right.
But and so the rabbi calls me up and he goes, we need 10 people to do a minyan, right? In Judaism, in order to elevate someone's soul, you got to have 10 men in a quorum, right? You got to have a quorum,
Gotcha.
Just 10 men. And so I called the VFW here. I ended up calling a few state senators, a few people. The next day, we had 700 people show up.
Holy smokes. Wow.
700 people show up. We had veteran Harley clubs come and escort the hearse. We had the national, what's it called? Fort Gordon and Fort Benning fought over who's going to send the units to do the 21 gun salute.
Oh, the color guard.
The color guard. We had people just come from everywhere, people from just the community. And I was standing there looking in awe. My rabbi looks at me and he goes, you did a mitzvah. And a mitzvah is a good deed in Hebrew and Yiddish. Learn it. It's a good word. Mitzvah. When someone says you're a mensch or you did a good mitzvah, those are good things. I know you're in Texas, Mark, and y'all don't get a lot of Jews over there, but every once in a while there's a few in the crowd. And so a mitzvah and a mensch, good words to remember, especially when you're traveling. Right? And so, but what was amazing is as we stood there and we spoke, at the end of the service, every person that was a veteran there, it was like we all knew each other. We all grew up together. And there were age gaps, people in their 60s, 30s, 20s, 40s, 50s, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines.
Right.
Well, Coast Guard. We had a few Coast Guard guys and Air Force guys. We kind of tried to put them in one corner together and just be like, play nice. But
hey, said like true Army guys, right?
But we were having, it was fascinating, and it reminded me of just what it means. That's the best of America. And I don't know what's happening. We're recording this. It's 2 days after the election, folks, and everything seems uncertain. And when we air this, it's going to be the week of Thanksgiving, and we may already be over this. But I will say this because it plays to the moment I'm saying it. No matter what happens, that is America. That we're not red or blue. We're not Democrat or Republican. We're Americans first, and that's that. And so just that story, let it inspire you in this Thanksgiving season to really just remember that and let it kind of sink in, to understand that beyond our veterans, the community stepped up and other people came through to support it, because no one looked at the guy and said, "Oh, who did he vote for?" No one asked that question. Right. No one asked that question. And we have veterans from all walks of life that support all political factions, and no one's ever said, "Oh, what do you mean? I'm not helping him." Nope, not going to happen. That doesn't exist. And I hope that resonates with all of you, non-veterans, in kind of reducing the tension in our nation, bridging it back, no matter what happens, just being able. And I hope this series, and the reason I did Veteran November, and the reason I put that picture up on election day with everyone's names, did it military style, Mark, and you were tagged in it. And right. I don't know if you saw that, but it was a reminder for people to look and see that our armed services wasn't. Could you recognize a Democrat or a Republican on there? You couldn't. You know what you did recognize, though? The diversity of the men and women who served our nation.
Amazing diversity. I think, you hear about all this drama in the world where there's a lack of diversity or this or that. But, the military is a great place. It's from a diversity perspective. I made friends and learned things about people and areas and places that I would have otherwise had no way of having access to. And even the Air Force guys, you and I were just bopping a little bit with the Coast Guard. I mean, they took care of those planes that I leaped out of, and I even went to their movement operations school. And even in those schools, there was amazing diversity. There was camaraderie. People took care of each other. It wasn't about all this other stuff that you see out in the world. And if only they could feel that camaraderie. The world would be a better place if everybody could have that, even for some fleeting moments.
Yeah, Dan Crenshaw for president, folks. Dan Crenshaw and Tulsi Gabbard. That's the ticket. That's what's going to unite America.
One of each, right? Yeah, hey, that's right on.
Dan Crenshaw and Tulsi Gabbard.
Amazing.
That's it, folks. All right, we're way over. This is the longest episode of the series. But we're at the end of it, so I don't care. Folks, I will say this. On November 30th, Chris Cochran, a bunch of people who I've wanted to have on the show, Maria Thompson, Ken Foster, FISERV, the state of North Carolina. You guys know Chris Cochran over at Hacker Valley Studio. He's been on my show a few times, and we've hung out. We're going to do a live stream on November 30th, Monday, November 30th, with all of the veterans. People can come in, chime in, tune in, hang out. We're going to come in, ask questions, talk, reminisce. We're going to do it in the afternoon. We'll pour scotch down, and that's how we're going to lock up November and head into the most glorious time of the year, Christmas, or for us Jews, Hanukkah, where we get gold coins and little spinners. And my friends get Xbox and PlayStations.
Sounds like Chris Roberts, man. I did an event with Chris recently, and man, I tell you, some of the stuff we talked about, we were all over the map. It was very much like that, but it was just we were having a great time, right?
Yeah. So Chris and I did a podcast right before we both spoke at the Tel Aviv University Cyber Week event to promote the event a few Fridays ago, and we did it for an hour simply because he was on vacation. It was his daughter's birthday, and they were in a hotel somewhere. And so that's the only reason we went an hour. Otherwise, we could have gone 3, 4, 5 hours easily. It would have been one of those election coverage things. So without further ado, folks, Mark, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for your service, folks. Mark, thank you again.
My pleasure. And thank you for your service. I really appreciate you having me on.
Hey, I love it, folks. Veteran November. Tune back. Go catch all the previous episodes. If you're tuning in and Mark's the first episode you're listening to, go back, listen to all the other veterans, all walks, shapes, creeds, colors, religions, you name it. It's all there. It's all there. And you see really what's beautiful about our nation. If you need to be reminded of what's beautiful about our nation, take half an hour a day in the month of November and listen to my podcast. I promise you, it'll inspire you to understand what's really beautiful about our country right now. That's it for us here. We'll be back with more November 30th, live a podcast with all of my friends here, and everyone who's been on the show is invited to come back on as well. And we're just going to talk it out. We'll be on LinkedIn. You can hang out, ask us questions, just whatever. We'll be there. Until then, folks, this is James Azar signing off and wishing you all to please stay cyber safe.
Make sure to subscribe to our podcast and share it with your friends and colleagues. And get all the latest information at cyberhubpodcast.com.